But I also believe that there needs to be marketers like you and me who can understand this stuff and make it real and accessible to the brands that we're working with, because it's just very difficult for them to do it, right? Like in a lot of these organizations, especially these big ones, they'll have like a whole AI team, and I'm like, well, what are y'all doing? Like, because they're just so wrapped up in the red tape of the organization that they can't really innovate at the pace that an agency can.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of value in us continuing to educate ourselves, play with things, and help these companies ramp up.
Well, that's Mike King, CEO of iPullRank, an enterprise SEO agency based in New York. If you've been to a digital marketing conference in the past decade, you already know Mike. You know he's a gifted public speaker. You know he can be electric on stage. You also know he's insightful, thoughtful, and deeply technical in his knowledge of digital marketing. And over the past year, Mike has been at the center of three very important developments. The first is a detailed review of Google's testimony in their multiple antitrust trials. This is interesting and important in search marketing because it highlights the difference between what Google has publicly disclosed they're doing to review and evaluate and surface content in their search results versus what they're actually doing. The second is a technical analysis of the Google Docs leak. This is review of internal Google documentation that surfaced 8,000 of the signals that Google uses to actually decide on what and how high they're going to rank content. Mike's conducted an amazing analysis of these Google documents and what they mean for search marketing, and we have a great discussion on that topic as well. And the third is that Mike has been Chief Marketing Officer for an AI prompt management library, which gives him an insider's view on the practical application of AI, particularly in digital marketing. In this episode of the Digital Clinic, we talk about the future of digital marketing in an AI-enabled world, the nature of work, and how Mike is using what he's learned from both AI and the Google Docs leak to power his own agency. You really won't want to miss this episode of the Digital Clinic. Tell me a little bit about your personal and professional background.
Yeah, I was a bored kid who, discovered computers and the internet at 12. And so that's like early 90s. And then I just wanted to make computer games. So I kept going to Barnes and Noble and buying books on coding. And so I started in like QBasic. I was just learning from help files. Then I found out about like Pascal. I learned that. And then I learned C++, and it just kept going. Parallel pathing that, I also got into hip hop like really heavily. So, it's funny, I used the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air in my talk yesterday. I very much have a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air story in that I'm from Philadelphia. My parents moved me to Connecticut to go to a private school because they thought I was going to get into too much trouble in Philly. And so being in Connecticut, I wanted like ways to stay connected to my Philly roots. And so I ended up like getting really into all things hip hop. So like graffiti, breakdancing, DJing, and rapping. When I was in high school, I had a high school internship at Microsoft, building websites for the OLADB and ODBC teams. Also built a couple sites for the external Microsoft.com stuff. I was also really into hacking back then. So, the first thing that anyone ever paid me money for was because I kept hacking this site that provided web space. They're now like an internet backbone. And the guy came on the Unix chat one day. He was like, hey, could you please just stop hacking me? I'll pay you to do something. And at this point, I'm like 14, 15 or whatever. And the guy pays me like $150 to write guest book tutorial, like CGI script tutorials and everything. I used that to buy a pair of like Jason Kids, and I was like, yes, I can make money on the internet, like that sort of thing. I went to school for computer science, went to Howard University, and I just wanted to make music instead. So I did that because I had a couple internships. My stepmom is a VC, or she was a VC, and they were based here actually. It was a firm called IDG Ventures or something like that.
Yep.
And so she was doing that, and like the companies she was bringing into the fund, she would just get me internships at. I was just having a lot more fun making music. So I decided to do that, and I did that for a living for like 8 years, played all over the States, played all over Canada, played all over Europe, played in Africa once, played in Australia a couple times. So like I had this, indie rap career. And then in 2006, I got into a bicycle accident and I didn't have health insurance because this is pre-Obamacare. And I needed to get a job to pay my medical bills. And the first place to hire me was the SEO agency because of my development background.
Right.
And they were like, yeah, you can figure this out. But come to find out, they had no idea what they were doing. Like it was very much like a SEO chop shop. They had a room of like 30 people that were robo-calling people and selling, and then a room of like 5 people that were doing the work. And we had like 100 accounts. The thing about me is like I work really hard. So I'm like, okay, how does this work? You don't know how this works? Okay, let me figure it out. Like no one was teaching me things that work. They were like, hey, just bold some text on these pages. And then for link building, you just put in your query and you append add URL to the end of it so you can like build links on guest book sites and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, this isn't it. Like, this isn't what we're supposed to be doing. And they called him like the SEO production manager, like the guy that led our team.
Right.
He wasn't answering the phone. One day I just like answered the phone and I was like, yo, like what's going on? Oh yeah, we can fix that. And so I became the person that was there till like 10 at night, just getting things done. And this wasn't like consulting. This was, we give you the keys to the website and you just optimize it, right? So I was just like going in and fixing people's websites. And eventually the owner of the company realized this production manager guy wasn't doing anything and fired him and just made me the production manager. And I'm like 25, 26, like
Right.
I've never done anything like this. But again, it was just answer the phone and see what people's problems are while also figuring out how to actually do SEO.
Right.
So the thing with that job was I only wanted to keep it for like 3 months because I was about to go on my first European tour. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna make all this money, da da da. And I went to that production manager to like put in my notice. And he's like, wait, no, what do you mean? What do you mean you're leaving? Like you're the only one doing things here. And he was like, nah, you can just work from home while you're on tour. I'm like, what? That's an option? And I had this giant Dell laptop that probably needed like a hand truck to carry it, but I was bringing it with me on these tours, doing the work on the train and then uploading it once I got to Wi-Fi, because like Wi-Fi wasn't everywhere
Right.
at that point. So eventually I ended up at Razorfish in Philly, and I really enjoyed the work because we were working on big brands. Like I'm heavy into like, Polo Ralph Lauren. And that was like one of my main clients. And, we got them like #1 for the keyword sweaters. I'm like, oh, this is great. This isn't like that low level stuff I was doing before. This is like, I'm working on brands that I buy and I'm making significant impacts on it. At that point, I was like, hey, maybe if I stick with this, I can make a couple dollars. But in that role, I was just a contractor. I only had 24 hours a week, but I was still like overworking because I really wanted a full-time job there. Like I was building software there for them because, this is like 2010, 2011. There wasn't a lot of SEO software out.
Right.
And in fact, I didn't know anything about the SEO community. Like I didn't know there was one. I was just reinventing wheels and things. Like I had come up with article spinning myself without knowing that other people were doing it. I was like, oh yeah, we're making all this content. We can make all these different permutations and then shuffle them together and whatever. And, I had a lot of success doing things like that. I get to Razorfish and I find out about the SEO community. Also, like Screaming Frog SEO Spider just came out and I was like, oh, other people are making software. This is great, Because all we had was like Web Position Gold back then and like Xenu Link Sleuth, which were both terrible.
Yeah.
So with the 24 hours, I basically made it so I worked Tuesday through Thursday, and then I could still do shows and things like that. And one of my really good friends, his name is Dan, he was who I was touring with, and we were like on a train in Sweden one day, and he's like, Mike, I know you're doing this SEO thing. My cousin owns an SEO software company. I'm like, who's your cousin? Rand Fishkin. So I'm again mind blown that like my worlds are colliding in this way. And so when I was at Razorfish, I sent an email to Rand. I was like, hey, I know your cousin. I'm in this space. You know, I've read your book. It's okay. Like that sort of thing. And he was just super cool from day one, right? And he was like, oh, yeah. And I asked him, I was like, yo, what would you recommend for someone who's like looking to get involved in this space? What about blogging or whatever? And he was like, yeah, don't blog. Like, it's already too crowded. And I was like, cool, cool, cool. Nice to meet you. But then they had a meetup in New York. It was like a Moz meetup.
Yeah.
And Rand and Geraldine were there, and I met them in person. A few months go by, and I start writing blog posts for Moz's UMoz. It's like the UGC section of the blog. And my first post was like really popular. And then I'm like, oh, cool, I'll do this again. And I just kept doing it. And then that summer for MozCon, I was like, okay, I have to go because I'm connecting with all these people in the community and all of that. So I did, and like, you know, I was at Publicis Modem. It doesn't exist anymore. Because Razorfish wouldn't offer me the full-time job, I was like, I got to go to another Publicis agency, get a job offer, bring it back here, and then they'll have to do it. So I did that, and they still wouldn't match the offer. So I'm like, cool, I'm moving to New York. And so I was blogging, and I asked my manager, like, hey, will you guys send me to MozCon? And they were like, they gave me the runaround for like months. And then they were like, no, we're not going to do it. I was like, cool. Well, I'll spend the money myself. I'll go out there. I'll take the vacation days. And it was the best investment that I made because I connected with all these people in person after having like a popular series of blog posts and all that. And like I was saying to you, I reconnected with Jamie Steven, who I had worked with in my internship at Microsoft. We were featured in the Micro News and all that for this thing that we built called Intern Web. And so that quickly turned into them being like, hey, do you want to be more involved with Moz? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. They have their associates program. But also, that was the first time I saw Will Reynolds speak. And while he was on stage, I had this moment. I was like, oh, wow, they let Black people do this? Cool. And so I immediately pitched for SMX East. And they accepted me.
Yeah.
And I did a great job there. And that then snowballed into a lot of different things. It turned into me speaking, you know, everywhere. It turned into me causing like a bidding war for people looking to hire me for SEO roles in New York. Moz even tried to hire me, but like I had just moved to New York. I'm not moving to Seattle.
Right.
And I met the woman that would ultimately become my wife at SMX East that I spoke at. So like it was MozCon 2011, and then the things that happened like directly after it are all the things that set me up for what I am now, basically, because you know, I ended up working at a agency called iAcquire, where I ended up being like the director of marketing, and you know, they were putting me on the road even more. And then left there, went to another agency, and I was just like, why am I doing this? Like, I should just start my own shop. And at that point, my thought leadership was just so solidified that it was easy to turn that into a business.
Yeah.
And here we are 10 years later.
So name of your agency is iPullRank.
Yes.
Tell me about iPullRank.
Yeah, we're, you know, a digital marketing agency based in New York City. We do SEO, content strategy, and generative AI. We work in pretty much every vertical, but we have a concentration in e-commerce, financial services, and media and publishing. Basically all things that are very much in New York.
Right.
We've had a history of like doing a lot of innovative stuff for clients, and a lot of SEO teams that are like highly technical, that are like, we don't know what else to do. They come to us because we always have like those next level ideas. We've been doing a lot of work that I'm very proud of. And yeah, it's weird to think of like the impact that you have on the internet, because you know, like it's easy to try to minimize it. Like, oh yeah, you guys are just an SEO shop. But like the way that we've impacted content for such big organizations and what the downstream impact of that is on, you know, American society, like we've had a significant impact. And I really appreciate who people have become working in our company, right? Like there's a guy, his name is Gaetano Dinardi. He's a consultant now, but he started at iPullRank. And I'd be shocked if you haven't seen him on LinkedIn. Like he's one of those personalities. And when he came to us, he had no experience, right? Like he was an R&B singer and he had these like random jobs. Like when he showed up, and I always tell this story and he laughs at it. He's like a very typical New York Italian guy. And he came in like a pinstripe shirt, like looking like he stepped off the set of Sopranos.
Yeah.
But he was just so like earnest in what he was, like explaining to us in his presentation in the interview process. And I knew, I was like, if you're someone who can make it in music, even like if it's a small amount of making it, that is so difficult and there's no money involved. Now, if I put you in front of like a big brand where there are resources and, if I train you up in how to do these things, you're going to be really effective because you're going to try harder than someone who's like just came from a marketing environment.
Right.
And that was exactly it. Like this kid was like sleeping in the office. Like, and I don't encourage people to sleep in the office, but like he was doing that because he was like, this is what I need to do to ramp up to where I need to get to. And now he is literally someone that, B2B SaaS trying to do search or growth marketing or whatever, he's like top of the list for those people. So I'm really proud of that sort of stuff. Like, making another brand a couple $1 million or $1 billion, whatever, like we've done that over and over. It's really what we've been able to like do in helping people get to the next level of their careers. That's what I'm excited about as far as like the legacy of us as a company.
So you mentioned some of the massive impacts that you've been able to have on the internet, on people's lives. Can you give a couple of examples?
I mean, one of the biggest things that we did was for JP Morgan Chase. Like it's not just like, oh yeah, okay, we've helped help them sell more mortgages or whatever. But we've also done things supporting a program they call Advancing Black Pathways, which was all about like, diversity, inclusion, so on and so forth. And we helped them really understand those audiences and then how they could approach those different audiences through what they're doing in their core marketing. So like, how do we reach more Hispanic people? How do we reach more Black people and so on that are trying to be like first-time home buyers and so on? So yes, we help them grow generally, but we also help them grow in those segments that banks have historically not been good at reaching.
Right.
So that sort of stuff is really important to me, that we can, do more than just make a business money. Like we can come in and support initiatives like that.
So I'd love to talk with you about a couple of things that have happened over the last 12 months or so.
Sure.
Google's testimony, DOJ testimony. Take me back to what happened with Google, their testimony, why it was important, and what you did about it.
Yeah. So Google has been going through this a series of antitrust cases.
Yeah, they're making a career of it.
Yeah. But this main one that's been talked about a lot has to do with like search distribution, really like the deals that they do with Apple and, Firefox and things like that, where Google is the default search engine. Because the reality is that most people don't even know how to change their search engine. So they want to be, the primary choice so they can maintain the search volume and so on. So they can sell ads and all of that.
Right.
The complaint is that is it's monopolistic behavior, right? Because you're squeezing out the Bings, the DuckDuckGos, and whatever other search engines are. But as part of that, there's very much a deep dive into how Google works. And a lot of different people that have been in leadership at Google gave testimony. But most importantly, a gentleman named Pandu Nayak, who used to be like the VP of search, gave testimony as to how Google is using user signals to reinforce and inform what ranks. And so he talks about two different systems. One is called NavBoost, another one called Glue. NavBoost is for the core like 10 blue links or the core organic stuff. And then Glue is like all the other SERP features around it. The simplest way to understand it is like whatever gets clicked will be the thing that maintains the higher positions. And what happens is, if something is number one, but a bunch of users skip it because they're like, this isn't the right thing, and they click number 3, that becomes number 1, things like that. And so that's really important because there's always been a question as to whether or not Google uses those signals, right? But the thing is, in information retrieval, these are all best practices. like measuring session success as a function of what did a user click on, how long did they stay there, did they come back to the SERPs. Those are all things that every search engine uses. But Google has denied over and over, even though people like Rand Fishkin have gotten on stages and said, hey, everybody take out your phone. Let's all search for the same thing. Let's all click the same result. And we'll watch in real time that becomes the number one result.
Right.
So Google would look to discredit him for that and be like, oh, he's making up metrics. This doesn't work. Things like that.
Sometimes in very personal ways.
Exactly. Like calling him out, saying that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And then the SEO community, you know, there are pockets of the SEO community that just don't like Rand for whatever reason. And for me, he's always been someone who's like, his heart has been in the right place, even if he's been wrong about something, right? He's not someone that you like, or you should hate on for just like, oh, you're wrong again, right? Like he's always trying to uncover the right information. And so there are those people in those pockets saying like, yeah, Rand doesn't know what he's doing. He's talking about his software sucks, like just extrapolating that from something that Google was lying to us about.
Right. Coming
Coming into this year, I was given a presentation called Everything Google Lied to Us About. And it really centered.
It's been a long presentation.
It centered on a lot of these things that have been revealed as a function of, you know, that testimony, things that we're learning more about that Google is saying like, oh yeah, this is a new thing in our guidelines. It's like, well, that was an old thing. And you're saying now that you figured that out. So effectively, these guidelines are aspirational and you guys are trying to make your technology do it. But, you know, there's so many holes in it. Then that also kind of propended what ended up happening with the leaked documentation. And the leaked documentation was basically accidentally one of Google's internal systems pushed the documentation for the internal system live on GitHub. And then there's a variety of different things plugged into GitHub that you can automate, like saving that documentation. There's a system called HexDocs, which does that. And that documentation now lives publicly forever because of this. So a couple people found it, and a gentleman named Irfan Azimi handed it off to Rand. Rand reached out to me. He was like, hey, I think this is real. You should check it out. And it was real. It was like a whole lot of the telemetry, for lack of a better term, that Google is looking for pages when they're thinking about like, how do they store them? How do they rank them, score them, things like that.
And to clarify or add context, I think you've described this well. This is the list of ingredients, but not the recipe.
Exactly.
Super detailed list of ingredients, right? 14,000 attributes, 8,000 of which pertain to search.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. We now have a very internal view of what Google is doing. And so we get even more information around all this click activity, right? Like they've got a series of measures. It's like bad clicks, good clicks, long clicks, last longest click, all these sorts of things that are measures of that user behavior for when they've seen this page in the SERP. So we just have so much more clarity around that. And what that ultimately tells us is that SEO and UX need to work closer together, because we've always looked at those disciplines as like, you know, completely separate. Maybe you bring a UX person in after you've done the SEO, but really they need to work together, because your ultimate goal is keeping people on your page as long as possible, because that's the best signal you can send back to Google. It changes the complexion of search and how we do it. Because at the very least, we now need clickstream data to understand, like, you know, how often are people bouncing from our competitors' pages? And what aspects of those pages can we learn from to improve our user experience to keep people on the pages? And, you know, like even with clickstream data, that's typically like a separate set of tools. It's like SimilarWeb versus, you know, Screaming Frog or something like that. And SEMrush has a tool called .trends, where they're collecting data from Datos to provide that sort of stuff, but it still lives separate from the core SEO functionality. You know, beyond the clicks, there's just a lot of information of what Google is doing. So as an example, this is one of the ones that was really interesting to me. They have this measure called source type related to links. And what they do, like the index is stratified in 4 different buckets. You've got like high quality, medium quality, low quality, and then fresh docs, which is like news, right? And so the high quality stuff is stored in memory because they know they need to access it quickly. Fresh docs is probably stored in memory as well. Next layer down is stored on solid state drives, so not as fast as memory, but the faster version of storage. And then the low quality stuff is stored in what's called Terra Google, which is like the graveyard, and it's in like standard HDDs because they know they don't have to access that on a regular basis. There's a sliding scale of value applied to links based on where it lives in the index. And that's not something that we ever really could know about before, right? Like I knew that the index was stratified because there's patents where they talk about this multi-tier index system and all that. But now we know, like, you can use as a proxy how well does this page rank, and then how much traffic does this page get. If it gets a lot and it ranks well for a lot of things, it's in the higher end of the index. But there are no metrics for that in SEO. Like you'd have to put all that stuff together, which is what I'm doing. And so I'm working on this project where we are trying to replicate as many of those attributes that Google is storing as possible so we can have a more comprehensive view of how they're looking at the content. And then that way we can do things in alignment with what they're measuring and we can better optimize.
Right. So you reviewed all this testimony. You reviewed Google Docs leaks. What have you changed as an agency as a result?
It's more that we've doubled down on things because like I already had a series of hypotheses from all my research, but we have a better understanding of like how Google is doing it. So as an example, I've talked a lot about vector embeddings in the last year because they underpin everything in generative AI, everything in search. Like that's how relevance is scored, right? Like Google vectorizes your pages, they vectorize the queries, and then they perform distance measures, particularly cosine similarity. So whatever page is closest in multidimensional space to the query is the most relevant page. So we were already doing things like that, but we didn't really have an understanding that Google creates vector embeddings on the site level, and then they compare each page to the vector embeddings for the site. So now that we know that, we have that scoring in our content audits, in our keyword research and all that sort of stuff. So we can say, through the lens of how Google is looking at it, this page scores this way.
Right.
So it's really us zeroing in better on what it is that Google is doing and then using that to enhance what we're putting in front of our clients. Because there's levels to it, right? Like I can't be like, oh yeah, cosine similarity, to a client, but I can say this is scoring, a 50 versus the 100 that you're comparing against forwards ranking number 1. And so that simplification of these hardcore engineering concepts is what's allowed us to do things that clients haven't seen elsewhere. And it also allows us to get a lot of buy-in because they're like, oh, you guys really understand this.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh yeah, it depends. And it's 200 signals. Who knows? Like we're like, no, it's many signals, but these are the most important ones. And here's how you score side by side with your competitors. And so they're a lot more likely to move, take action, because when we're doing things like projections and all that, it's all centered around this data that no one else has. And we're able to call our shot a lot better than what they've seen before.
Yeah. The distillation to a score is also really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of that happens in the SEO space, but I think that, going after that simplicity has abstracted a lot of the things that we need to be doing to do better. Here's what I mean. So there's a lot of tools out there that are like these SEO content editors.
Yeah.
And you put in a keyword, you put in your content, and it gives you a score. And it'll say like, oh, your page is a 70 and use all these keywords so you can get to a 90 or 100 or whatever. Those tools are not doing what Google is doing. Google isn't just going to look at the one target keyword. They're going to look at keywords across a graph. And then they're going to look at the pages across that graph, extract features, and compare your page against what's in the graph.
Right.
Whereas these tools, they will just take the keyword, perform the search, grab the pages in the top 20, do TF-IDF on them, and then compare your page against that. So you're going to get closer with that approach, but you're not going to get where Google is looking. Being able to understand that, communicate that to clients, and tell them where the gaps are has been really powerful. Here's another example, right? Like Google moved from what's called lexical retrieval to semantic retrieval to hybrid retrieval, which is a combination of the two. Now, when I talk about TF-IDF or even like BM25, like these different ways of scoring pages versus keywords, that's lexical retrieval. But when you're doing things where you're comparing the vector embeddings, you're doing semantic retrieval. And like I said, Google is combining the two approaches to generate rankings. But almost all SEO tools still operate on the lexical model. So again, it's doing that will get you close, but it's not going to get you to like 100% optimal. And I'm trying to get to 100% optimal.
You've been close up to a lot of interesting developments in the AI community. You've seen a lot of custom GPTs. You've seen a marketplace for those GPTs. You have a deep understanding of the technology. What's your assessment of AI and its implications for digital marketing?
We're in a space where there's just so much going on, right? Like, and you know, the definition of AI is like it's getting smaller when it should be getting bigger. And what I mean by that is when people are talking about AI now, it's generally talking about generative AI. But AI is a lot of things like computer vision, you know, predictive analytics, all these sorts of things, which are super valuable in a variety of ways. For generative AI specifically, I think there's a lot of opportunity to eliminate a lot of the busy work, or at least make it easier to do. And a lot of opportunity for us to be more creative and also more strategic. But here's the thing. Generative AI has been good for like a year. And you have the ability to make movies, the ability to make music. You have the ability to make really interesting imagery. Despite that, our feeds are still the same boring stuff that they've been, right? And I think the analog here is, think about YouTube versus Instagram. We've had the ability to do streaming video in the way that people are doing it on like TikTok and all that for like 15 years. But it's only been in like the last, 5 to 8 years that you have people who are making a living off of making like skits and really interesting things using that same streaming technology. What I believe is that things are not gonna change substantially as far as like the content output being better until a generation grows up with generative AI, where they're like, okay, it's just a tool I use like every day. Like I'll make a movie today just because I want to make a movie, and that's what I put on Twitter or whatever. So I'm excited to see that. Now, in the meantime, it's really people just replicating their busy work through these tools, like whether it's like doing keyword research or, like writing a blog post or whatever. Like they are going to look for ways to replace themselves or scale themselves for these tasks that like no one should really have to be doing themselves anyway at this point, right? And perhaps blog post is not a good example of it because, there's still a lot of great knowledge and information and perspective you can get by creating your own blog posts. But I suspect that in the near future, it's really just going to be about that. Like, how do I optimize for scaling myself?
Right.
And, a lot of that is what we're doing, right? Like we're plugging it into various aspects of our deliverables because we are already automating things to some degree using things like AppScript or whatever, and then plugging in the APIs. But now with generative AI, like as an example, we do a lot of persona modeling, and then we also align that with keywords and, the need states of keywords. And that has been a very manual process historically. Right. Now it's like, cool, we've got the persona, plug it in, and then you have basically a classifier through a generative AI platform where it's like, okay, which of these personas aligns with this keyword? And then what need state is that persona in when they're searching for that keyword? So that goes from taking like, 10 hours to 2 minutes, right? So there's a lot of value in that sort of stuff, in that we can, again, get the busy work out of the way and get back to the more strategic discussions of things. A lot of that automation work is what we've been focused on. And, like, for example, with reporting, if you're using Looker Data Studio or Looker, whatever it's called, you can use the API to like grab the right template and then have it do all the data connections. And then it could also like compare the data points and give you a first draft of that report. And then you go in, you can look at it strategically and be like, okay, well, these are the things that are most important here. Here are what the next steps need to be. So again, we're cutting down that time of putting together a report, which could probably be like, 4 or 5 hours, to like 15, 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of value in us doing that, because it then gives us the space and time to think about, like, well, how can we improve this? Where are the opportunities that we wouldn't have had the time to look for before? And, how do we capitalize on them?
Yeah.
So I think that's what everyone is attempting, but people are still defaulting to like 2 or 3 tools, right? Like ChatGPT, Midjourney, Copilot, things like that. But we're in a space where we now have open source versions of this stuff that are also state of the art, right? Like Llama 3.2 is fantastic. And I can run it on my laptop. I don't have like a RTX 4090 on my machine. I have like some, GPU from like 3-4 years ago, and it runs just fine. So I'm excited for people to have this power to really like play with and not be so concerned with like, oh, am I using too many tokens, or, like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because I think the creativity is just going to be exponential once everyone has this stuff where they can play with it to whatever level they want.
So again, what's interesting about your experience is that you've seen hundreds, maybe thousands of different GPT use cases in particular. Based on that experience, based on running iPullRank, do you have a mental framework that you use to consider when and how AI should be employed?
Yeah.
And when not?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those power tools that people are just overusing in a lot of ways. Cause like, I'll see people do things with it where it's like, that could have just been a regex statement, or, you don't have to do, there's just a lot of situations where it's just being overused. And I think that it's difficult because, people don't know what they don't know, right? They're just like, I have a problem, I want to solve it. I don't care if, running this prompt is the equivalent of taking 3 flights or whatever. I just want the output that I want. But for us, we're primarily using retrieval augmented generation for a lot of what we're doing. So like we're building RAG pipelines. And for any viewer that doesn't know what that is, it's basically when you combine a search engine with a large language model. And so what we do is we build these custom indexes of content and data for our clients and use that for generating whatever it is that we're trying to generate.
Right.
So lower likelihood of hallucination, higher likelihood of something that's actually usable. Almost all of our use cases are starting from there. So as an example, when we create content for a client, we'll create like a custom GPT, which custom GPTs are basically RAG pipelines as well, where we will upload the brand style guide, and then we'll say, okay, we wrote this piece of content. How does this align or misalign with the style guide? And it'll give us like recommendations. We can do a lot of like reviews like that, so we cut down on the back and forth between us and the client. Mm-hmm. We can also do that with legal review. And I'm not saying replace lawyers with it, but it's like a first pass. So if there's anything glaring, we can pick that up pretty easily.
Yeah. I find it's pretty effective in a legal context for omission. What am I missing?
Yeah.
What risks am I not considering in this?
So that sort of stuff is just like creating feedback loops that are really effective for what it is that we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as far as like a framework of, when to use it, when to not use it, I mean, I kind of leave my team to their own devices to some degree. I'm like, yo, how do you want to solve this? And then if they bring me something and I'm like, well, you didn't need to use that, that's an education opportunity. Because I'm like, all right, well, you could have done like a very simple model, not like a chat GPT. Dan Petrovic, one of the guys that was involved in the leak stuff, he's been training his own small models. So I'm wanting us to go more in that direction where we have like these small expert models for different things. But there's a bit of a learning curve to training models. So I don't know if I'm in a space where I can get my team to do it just yet. But I'm trying to get to a space where like I've mastered it, where I can be like, okay, here's how we simplify this process.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of it is just trial and error. And I think, everyone is doing trial and error, and all the way up to the computer scientists that are building these things. They're like, what works, what doesn't? And we're just taking a lot of notes as a team. Like we have a whole generative AI channel where it's like, hey, here's what I did, here's what I did. And so we're comparing those learnings. Generative AI is still a content strategy problem. People just look at it as a technical problem, but really you want consistency of output. Part of that is having shared prompts. Part of it is making sure everyone's working from the same set of things, set of models, set of tools. And so we've done a lot of like documenting what's working for us and what's not. And I think ultimately we will land on like a stronger framework for that. But right now it's really just trial and error.
Yeah. So lots of different technical contexts and environments, lots of different models.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that work better for certain things, right? Like I said, when we're doing most of our RAG stuff, we're using like Llama 3.2 for it rather than ChatGPT, because you're dealing with a lot of tokens, and that's going to be pretty expensive when you're doing these RAG pipelines. I know Gemini has like a much bigger context window. Like I think they're going towards 2 million tokens. They definitely have 1 million right now. And they've also launched prompt caching. So you end up saving money for, these big contexts and all that. But I've just not been impressed by Gemini's outputs.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to me because like Google invented this technology. Why is theirs not the best?
Yeah. I have that same question. I look at Gemini and think, surely this is not the best of what you have to offer. You're using something else internally that's better.
I think they are.
Yeah, they must be. So a few months ago, Sam Altman, in I'm sure a deliberately provocative statement, claimed that in 3 or 5 years, AI would be doing 95% of what an agency does. What's your sense of that?
I don't think that's wrong. Because when I think about it, most of what we do in SEO is building a series of ETL pipelines. ETL I know, but for anyone that doesn't know, it's extract, transform, load, right? So think of it like this. Like when you do rank tracking, you're extracting the data from Google, and then you take it out, put it in Excel, and you transform it into something else. And it might be a series of charts, which you then load into a PowerPoint. So there's a series of like heuristics for how you're transforming the data, but almost all of that can be done programmatically at this point. So yes, I agree that if we think of most of what we do as an ETL pipeline, it can be replaced by generative AI right now. The special sauce of your creativity, your strategy or whatever.
Right.
I mean, that's what we're all banking on, but like creativity is just synthesis. Like we talk about it like we're thinking of things out of thin air and we have these fantastic ideas. No, you have a series of experiences that you synthesize into this idea. What do computers do really well? Synthesize.
Well, and also, so I agree, pretty much everything's derivative. Well, LLMs are derivative engines.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so if we get to a point where those have encoded enough of human knowledge, which we're not there, like, because we're just training it on the internet, there's in books and things like that. There's so much more that we have in our heads. So if there is some way for them to capture more of that collective knowledge and then be able to synthesize it, then yeah, it can replace what we do. But
so then how do you think about the future? How do you evolve your agency, an agency, my agency, to deliver value in the future? What matters now? What muscles should we be building?
I mean, I think the creativity thing, the synthesis for creativity thing is a long way off, right? Like we keep talking about reasoning and all that these models are doing. That's the wrong word for it. It's not reasoning, right? Like it's guessing a bunch of things. It's not even guessing, right? Like that's the wrong word too. It's generating a series of outputs, comparing that to other outputs.
Yeah, it's predictive outputs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we are going to get that level of synthesis in the next 5 years. I think we're going to get some other things that are interesting. I think we are likely to see another architecture like the transformer that shifts things in the near future. But I don't know that what we think of as creativity is going to pop out of these machines in the next 5 years. So it's really that, like, how do we clear the way by having it do all the menial tasks to be more creative and more strategic? Like, those are the things that we can add here. And I think to some degree, we will also evolve in a way where we're doing something that we're not doing now that is more valuable once all the menial tasks are taken away. Like something I'm not even thinking about, right? Like we may find that there's more value in this one thing that people just weren't doing because it took too long. But now we have all this time on our hands. Let's do that thing.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's just going to change as the technology changes.
Yeah. If you can automate everything that can be defined through process documentation, all the menial stuff, then what's left is deep expertise, a deep understanding of strategy and orchestration. So you can automate things within given disciplines and channels, but that doesn't necessarily replace strategic orchestration to understand when to invoke one in complement with another.
I agree with that. And the other thing is that I don't think it's ever been the shortage of ideas that have stopped.
Right. That's a good point.
You know what I mean? It's been navigating the organization to make those ideas actually happen.
Yeah.
And if we get to a space where like so much of deployment is automated and we can say, here's the idea, let's get it going, like that speed to deploy, that could change everything, right? Like think of the inefficiencies that we have collectively in aggregate as the human species.
Yeah.
Right? Like think about politics and how inefficient that is. Think about, you know, just anything that we could be like, hey, this should take 5 minutes. Instead, it took us 5 months, right? The ability to get more things out faster will have such a like ripple effect across everything that it's not so much about like, okay, what is the creativity? It's more about how do we keep up with what it is that we're able to do now? And I think to some degree that's always been true. It's just like we've had technology that could do things, but we've had people that have stood in the way of it.
Right.
But with generative AI, we can have things be so plugged in where it's like I have an idea and then 5 minutes later it's done. Right. And then, you know, there's still a lot of things that have become a lot more feasible that were just science fiction before.
Right.
Like think about the Star Trek holodeck. Like we could probably have that now with generative AI where it's like, cool, you know, generate me the scene in this room as I've described it. Like that was science fiction now. You just need like a bunch of, you know, panels and like, what do you call it? Like 3D projectors.
Sure.
And you could do all this now.
Yeah.
So I think that once we have these different modalities that become real, you know, like we're trying to do it with like VR and AR and all that sort of stuff. And I don't feel like any of that is really ever stuck, but we're quickly approaching a space where we can do like our wildest dreams.
Yeah.
And I think what happens then is like, okay, well, we have a different set of things that we want to do as people, right? Like if you're in a space where your computers do everything for you, we get to a space of like, I don't know, universal basic income because nobody has to work. And then we're just playing with technology all day, like creating the worlds that we want is like a shift in what people want to get up and do every day. And I think that's the danger of this technology because, you know, we're not going to have to do so many things that like have been core to the human experience.
Yeah. I would almost guarantee that there are things that people would very quickly offload as trivial, menial stuff I don't want to do that turn out to be like on a soulful level, actually really important to your well-being.
Exactly. And I'm hesitant to go heavy into sci-fi stuff, but there was a movie I think it was called The Replacements. It starred Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
And basically everyone was like by themselves in their home in these like machines, and they lived the entirety of their life online.
Right.
And like no one went outside and things like that. I feel like everyone is always on their phone, right? Like we're all addicted to the internet. And I see a world where we like slide into that, where everyone is just having a very individual experience, but like doing whatever they wanted at any given moment. And I think that's so bad for society, but we could so easily slide into that.
Yeah. This is the first circumstance in my professional life where I feel like I struggle, and I think most other people do, to fully understand the implications.
Yeah.
Like I feel like my thinking isn't fast enough to keep up with how quickly the technology is changing and what that means, not next week, but a year from now, 2 years from now.
Yeah, when ChatGPT first came out, there was such an explosion of, I mean, it's still happening right now, but like that initial explosion, it was like every day there was a new paper, a new open source library, and it was so anxiety inducing because you're like, I'm behind, but I read everything from yesterday.
Right.
You know? And even now, there's still every week, if you go to archive.org, there's like so many new papers. And I'm at the point where it's like I don't go on TikTok. I just wait till the best of TikTok ends up on Instagram.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, I don't go to archive directly. I wait for one of the papers to be in my feed on Twitter a number of times, and I'm like, okay, that's the one I need to read, because otherwise it's whiplash, right? It's just so much stuff coming out.
Yeah.
I this part of me that's like, I want to stop doing SEO and like go back and get my PhD in AI and like really contribute to this world. But I also believe that there needs to be marketers like you and me who can understand this stuff and make it real and accessible to the brands that we're working with, because it's just very difficult for them to do it, right? Like in a lot of these organizations, especially these big ones, they'll have like a whole AI team, and I'm like, well, what are y'all doing? Because they're just so wrapped up in the red tape of the organization that they can't really innovate at the pace that an agency can.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of value in us continuing to educate ourselves, play with things, and help these companies ramp up and, all these opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. So what do you think the digital marketing agency of the future looks like?
It's smaller. It's very technology enabled. I think you need like data scientists on staff if you don't already have them, like we've historically had them. I think, data engineering needs to be a huge part of it. And the people who are doing the work, whether they're strategists or, whatever people are calling them, they need to have stronger technical skill sets. I think in the agency world, people have gotten away with just like being deep in their one discipline,
right? Like
UX, SEO, or whatever. You really have to be like that T-shaped marketer or M-shaped marketer, where it's like you have a deep understanding of how, generative AI works. You have a deep understanding of analytics. You got a deep understanding, obviously, of your core thing, because the interplay is just becoming, it's just so deep now. You can't just do the one thing. So you're going to have like deeper, I don't want to call them generalists, like it's like a combination of the specialists.
They're strategists.
Yeah, that can really understand the channels of technology and have the ability to synthesize where the opportunities are.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't just be like the one thing anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I think interestingly, that's one of the big implications of all three of the things we talked about, right? The DOJ testimony and the Google Docs leak and what's happening with AI. They all point to you actually have to be a marketer, a broadly capable marketer.
I agree. And for me, like that's what I've always been, because I've always had broad interests. And it's always been weird to me because, when I talk about these first jobs I had, I was a webmaster. And webmaster is splintered into like 30 different jobs. You got like front-end developer, back-end developer, network administrator, DevOps, and all. Like I was doing all those things, right? And so it's always made sense for me to know as much as I can about everything so I can speak intelligently to those people and work with them. And if for whatever reason we don't have those roles, I can step in and do like at least a decent job on it. So, you know, the over specialization to me has always been like a weakness for people that we've worked with. I've always thought of it as like people speaking multiple languages, right? Like, and you know, you may be someone who speaks SEO, but now you want to learn how to do copywriting. Like I've always encouraged people that have worked on our teams, like what language do you want to learn? Let's support that so you can do better work when you interface with those sorts of people.
Yeah. So tell me about the book you've been writing.
Yeah, it's called The Science of SEO, and it's very much, it's kind of like a information retrieval book for SEOs, right? So like I walk through the historic innovations of Google from a technical perspective to walk through like, here's what they did, here's how it operated. I'm effectively stitching together like a bunch of information from, you know, patents, white papers, things I know from my own experience, a lot of, you know, the core information retrieval advancements and how Google uses them and what they've contributed, things like that. I walk through how the internet works, how the web works, how browsers work. I teach people how to make a simple search engine so they can really understand, like on a granular level, what is lexical search versus semantic, how do you do hybrid, all of that. And then I take you through like, okay, here's how you do SEO with all that information. So it's basically taking everything that's in my head and putting it in a book in hopes that it helps our whole industry level up in a variety of ways. Because, you know, the way I landed on wanting to write this book was I got tired of saying it depends. And I was like, well, what does it depend on? Like, I want to have more intelligent conversations with my clients. Like every time I run into something, there was a point where, you know, we were doing page speed audits and I felt like I'm just parroting what it says in Page Speed Insight.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I want to really understand how performance works on the internet. And, you know, I went down to the level of understanding that like, oh yeah, speed on the internet is a function of the speed of light traveling through cables. Like I got that in depth on it. And then that allowed me to restructure how we did our page speed audits so that they're a lot more actionable and valuable to our clients. So I want everyone to be able to do that because I see a lot in our space where people are just like exporting PDFs from SEMrush and being like, here's your audit.
Right.
And that's not like, why is anyone paying you for that?
That hurts everybody.
Agreed. And the thing is like a tool like SEMrush will say everything's on fire anyway.
Yeah.
There's no context for what the business is doing and why they're doing it. So I want everyone to have the ability to have those conversations. And I also just want like a capstone on my SEO career. Like here's this artifact that represents what I was able to accomplish. And I just want to share that information with everyone else.
Yeah, that's fantastic. When does the book come out?
It should be early 2025.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll include, you've got a landing page for the book as well, right?
Yeah, it's on Amazon and all that already.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll include links in the show notes as well. All right. Really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.